Okay, welcome everyone and good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for our interactive panel discussion on closing the pay gap for Black women in honor of Black Women's Equal Pay Day. My name is Tiffany Bartow, the Program Director for the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. The Commission works in a culturally inclusive manner to promote equality and justice to all women and girls by educating and advocating on their behalf. The Commission helps to make changes in policies, to champion equal pay, to engage girls in STEAM programs, and to provide resources to women and girls in addressing key challenges such as gender inequities and cultural injustices. I hope you find tonight's information informative and empowering. Some housekeeping for this evening is to please use your chat feature to ask any questions that you may have. Individual presenters may pause to allow to answer your questions. If you do have specific legal questions, we will have resources available to you at the end of our programming. And if you hear anything that resonates with you tonight, please feel free to use the reaction button because we would like to hear from you. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our programming if we do not get to your questions in the middle of programming. The presentation along with the bios will be available to all registered for this discussion. Next slide, please. The Commission is honored to have partnered with the first partner, the Equal Rights Advocate, the Labor Commissioner's Office, Nichelle Henderson, Trustee of the Los Angeles Community College District, and our Chair of the Commission to bring you this much needed discussion in closing the pay gap for Black women. Next slide, please. Jennifer Siebel Newsom is going to be presenting a very warm welcome to us, and she fights for equity and make sure that we are fighting for our gender rights. And now a warm welcome from our first partner, Jennifer Siebel Newsom.
All right, everyone, for the technical difficulties, give us one moment so that we can restart it with the sound.
Hi everyone, I'm California First Partner Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and I'm so grateful to be joining you today for this important panel discussion on Black women's equal pay. Although California has some of the strongest pay laws in the nation, we still have work before us to achieve pay parity. Today, women in our state earn 88 cents for every dollar paid to their male counterparts. That number plummets to 59 cents for Black women. That Black women have to work 19 months to earn the same amount of money as a white man earns in 1 year.
So Tiffany, maybe we should just give it one more moment, make sure we can hear the first partner, and if not, we'll move on.
Hi everyone, I'm California First Partner Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and I'm so grateful to be joining you today for this important panel discussion on Black women's equal pay. Although California has some of the strongest pay laws in the nation, we still have work before us to achieve pay parity. Today, women in our state earn 88 cents for every dollar paid to their male counterparts. That number plummets to 59 cents for Black women. That Black women have to work 19 months to earn the same amount of money as a white man earns in 1 year is one of the most obvious and tangible ways in which society devalues women and their labor. But the pay gap didn't just happen by chance. The pay gap is a legacy of systemic racism and sexism, a legacy that opened the floodgates during the pandemic, leading to the lowest women's employment levels we've seen in decades. Specifically, Black women, Latinx women, women who are immigrants, and other working moms were pushed out of the workforce at particularly high rates. For those who are able to keep their jobs, they've been pushed to the breaking point, juggling childcare, elder care, and work during a global pandemic. So now, more than ever, we must do everything that we can to support women workers and finally achieve pay parity and economic security for every single woman. Because after all, we can't achieve racial justice without economic justice, and we can't achieve gender equity without racial equity. As a working mom and first partner, I am deeply committed to this fight because I believe we can get to a place where all women are valued, respected, and paid equally. That's why I partnered with the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls to launch our Equal Pay California campaign in 2019. And as part of the campaign, we are hosting conversations like the one today, in addition to trainings, to let women know their rights in the workplace. We also developed the Equal Pay Pledge to acknowledge and highlight pay equity and work equity best practices already adopted by leading California companies, and to encourage other companies to follow suit. To date, over 60 major California employers, from Twitter to Adobe to Gap, have signed our pledge, and working with the California Labor Commissioner's Office, equal rights advocates, and many more partners, we are actively moving the needle forward towards creating a California for all women. Now, I don't know about you, but I am so eager to hear from today's speakers and see what we can do together as a community to achieve equal pay for Black women in particular. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the First Partners Office for providing this video and Jennifer Siebel Newsom for staying included in this topic. And now we'd like to move over to our next presenter, and that will be Ms. Jessica Stender from the Equal Rights Advocates.
Thank you so much to the First Partner and to the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls for their leadership in the fight for equal pay, and also to all of my co-panelists. It's a real honor to be a part of this event. I am Jessica Stender, and I'm Senior Counsel at Equal Rights Advocates. We are a civil rights organization dedicated to protecting and expanding economic and educational access and opportunities for women and girls, and fighting for gender justice for all. We provide legal representation to workers and students, and we focus a lot of our work on these efforts to close the gender and racial wage gaps. We were a lead organizational sponsor of several bills in California to strengthen our state equal pay laws, which you're going to hear about today. And we also support the passage of legislation throughout the country to advance equal pay and economic security more broadly throughout the United States. Next slide. We also are really proud to chair the Equal Pay Today campaign, which was launched on the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, the Federal Equal Pay Act, and it consists of national and state-based women's legal advocacy and worker justice organization, and our mission is to close the gender wage gap. So we invite you to check out our website. We will send out information later to join our fight for equal pay through the Equal Pay Today campaign. So before we get into the meat of the presentation today, we want to take a quick poll, and you can go back for this one. We want to take a quick poll to just get a sense of who's in the room, make it as interactive as possible as we can in these Zoom days. So we're going to put up a poll now with a question about how you, as a participant in this webinar, are engaged in equal pay advocacy. So we'll put that poll up now. And please just note if you are engaged in equal pay advocacy in any of the following ways, and we'll just give you a moment to answer, and then everyone will be able to see the answers. Give it a few more seconds. Okay. And let's check out the results. All right, so it looks like we've got a mix. We've got some legal advocates, we've got some legislative advocates. Very excited to see that we have some employers or others within companies who are addressing these issues, and want to salute you for your work in that area. And then we have a lot of individuals who might not be officially engaged in equal pay advocacy, but are very committed to equal pay. And we're going to talk about opportunities for everyone to get involved in this fight. So thank you for taking that poll. Next slide. So we're going to talk today, of course, about the wage gap, and particularly about how it affects Black women. So I want to just start with a kind of commentary that despite the fact that the Federal Equal Pay Act has been on the books for nearly 60 years, and we, of course, have had our state Equal Pay Act in California as well as in other states throughout the country for nearly as long, women typically earn less than men in virtually every industry and occupation in this country. Research shows that women are affected by the wage gap as soon as they enter the labor force, and that the gap continues to expand over the course of a woman's career. So while we have these laws on the books, we still see that wage discrimination and other factors, which we're going to touch on today, contribute to this gender and race-based wage gap. Next slide. So there's the big but. We have these laws on the books, but we do know that these wage gap numbers are very real. And so we've put here the wage gap numbers that exist for the year based on the year of 2019. And this is based on US Census Bureau data for women working full-time year-round. And you can see that while women overall experience a wage gap of 82 cents to every dollar earned by men, which is harmful in and of itself, many women of color experience a much more severe and extreme wage gap. So as you can see, Black women overall, and this is nationwide, earn just 63 cents to their white male counterparts, Native women 60, and Latinas just 55 cents. Next slide. And I think when we talk about this, it's important to really talk about what this translates into. We know that women are more often now the co or primary breadwinners in their families. So the gap not only takes a toll on women, but also on the families they support. So you can see here a little bit about what would happen if the Black women's wage gap, based on the numbers that we're seeing at the national level, were eliminated. So you'd see more than $964,000 in lost wages over the course of a lifetime reverse. More than 2.5 years of childcare could be paid for if this gap were eliminated. 153 more weeks of food for a woman and her family, 15 additional months of mortgage and utility payments, and finally 22 more months of rent. So this wage gap is not just an esoteric number, but has real life effects on women and the families they support. So we're going to talk today about some of the contributors to the overall wage gap. And so we'll talk a little bit about the first that are listed here and dive a little bit more into the last one. So some of the contributors that we observe for the Black women's wage gap, and really for women overall, there still persists intentional discrimination in the workplace that affects both hiring, so what jobs Black women are hired into and or what pay they are given. And that can be both intentional, but also unconscious bias or stereotypes that affect what an employer or a hiring manager might hire a woman into. We've also seen that a contributor to the broader wage gap is pay secrecy. And we know that many private employers will subject their employees to workplace rules that prohibit them from talking about pay or sharing their pay with others. And that can make it really difficult for employees to become aware of pay disparities. And we're going to talk a little bit about how our state has advanced the needle in these ways. The next contributor that I want to highlight is around employer reliance on prior salary. So we know that it has traditionally been a very common practice for employers to ask a job candidate about their prior pay and to rely on it when they set a new job, a new employee's starting pay. So when we have this very pervasive wage gap across the board in almost every industry in this country, we know that then these wage disparities will just be perpetuated if an employer is relying on someone's past pay. Finally, we know that there is a lack of sufficient workplace policies and structures that support women. And that really often has to do with the issue of caregiving. Although men more often are involved in caregiving in our country than has been the case in past years, women still are more likely to shoulder caregiving responsibilities. And the lack of an adequate amount of leave, especially paid leave from the workplace for either parenting or other caregiving needs, means that women more often have to take time out of the workforce to provide caregiving, which then negatively impacts their wages, and this compounds over the course of their career. Finally, we're going to talk a bit about the trend of occupational segregation and how that contributes to the overall wage gap. And before we do a little bit of a deeper dive on that, we're going to do one more poll to get a sense of familiarity with this. So we'll put up poll number 2. Simple question, whether you are familiar with, have heard about this trend of occupational segregation. We'll give you a moment to answer. And there may be an issue with voting. So we're going to give it one moment to see if we can vote, and otherwise we're going to move on. Okay, so we're going to move on to dive into the deeper dive into occupational segregation. So we can go to the next slide. So we know that occupational segregation affects all women, but particularly women of color and particularly Black women. And what we mean by occupational segregation is a few different things. One, we see that women overall are concentrated into lower paying jobs and occupations. And women are overrepresented in low paid jobs and underrepresented in high paid jobs. That means that we see this wage disparities can emerge from the types of jobs that women are in, and especially Black women. So overall, women make up nearly 2/3 of the workers in the 40 lowest paying jobs in our country, and they make up just 37% of workers in the 40 highest paying jobs. And this is women overall. And it's even more pronounced for women of color. So you can see up on this slide that although Black women have the highest labor participation among all women, they are concentrated in lower paid industries, and their level of occupational segregation is actually greater than, 38% greater than, the segregation that affects Black men, and 43% greater than the job segregation that affects white women. So we see that this trend is kind of even more pronounced for Black women. In addition to occupational segregation being a problem across industries, we also see that even within companies, this trend of occupational segregation can exist. And so various studies have been done to show that within a company, oftentimes women and people of color are occupying the lower paid jobs, whereas men and white people are occupying the higher paid jobs, particularly white men. And so we have a few different studies up here, and we'll send you these as follow-up materials as well, that just represent that, that fact, that statistic. And they're pretty troubling if you want to check out. One of them I just wanted to note here is the survey of 222 companies employing more than 12 million people, showing that as a whole, women of color constituted only 3% of C-suite executives, 6% of vice presidents, and 11% of managers. And then a separate analysis of Census Bureau data, US Census Bureau data, showed that Black women hold only 4% of all manager positions in our country. So I wanted to just really quickly here put up some statistics of Intel. And I want to first give Intel a shout out for putting these statistics online. They were required, as were many other large employers of over 100 or more employees, to provide their internal pay data to our federal equal pay agency, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I'll talk a little bit more about that pay data reporting. And they were not required to publish it publicly, but they were so surprised by what they found when they did an internal pay audit that they chose to do so. And really to show we recognize we have a problem, and we urge other companies to do this type of pay data analysis. And their data was really telling. It showed that 41 of 52 top executives who were making more than $200,000 a year were men. 37% of them were white. And this same ratio was applied across the board to all job classifications. So in general, white and Asian men dominated top pay groups, and women and people of color clustered in lower pay bands. So I just highlight this as one example of what we see in a lot of big companies, and also just the importance of employers doing these types of pay data audits, because it does show changes that do need to be made. Great, and that's a great question I see in the chat. Are there any efforts to get other companies to do this analysis and report out the data? Perfect segue into my next point, which is that this effort to encourage or require employers or companies to do this type of pay data collection and reporting is growing. And we've actually seen a number of companies voluntarily do that. A few of them, Citibank, Starbucks, and a few have chosen to voluntarily do their pay audits and come public with their data. However, there have also been efforts to legislatively require companies to do this. And really it's on the recognition of a lot of companies, especially larger ones, may not even realize that there is this type of occupational segregation occurring. And so having this type of pay audit occur really requires them to then look inside, do this type of audit, and determine that there may be these pay disparities they weren't aware of. Many people read about when Salesforce did this, and Mark Benioff was surprised to see that women and people of color were being paid less, and that then instigated a change. And he made across-the-board changes to ensure that people were being paid fairly and as required by the law. So one legislative trend, most recently in California, we passed SB 973. It was authored by Senator Jackson, and that requires larger companies of 100 or more employees to do this type of pay data reporting to our state anti-discrimination enforcement agency. It does not have to be public, but we hope that companies will follow the lead of Intel and others in publishing their data and recognizing how helpful that can be to publicly recognize an issue and then bring about change within their companies to address it. So far, we're the only state to require it in that way, although Illinois just passed a law that has a somewhat similar pay data reporting scheme. I won't go into the details, but I'm happy to talk with you offline if you have more questions about that. And then finally, some other efforts that are being undertaken to address the wage gap in a structural way. There are efforts to advance paid family leave protections and access. So just last year in California, we expanded our paid family leave system such that more people can take leave, and that is a huge and important step. Some states have followed our lead, but more states need to do this. And then of course, at the federal level, there are also efforts to ensure that employers have to provide some type of paid family leave to ensure that workers can take leave and not be punished in terms of their wages when they come back. Another effort that we've seen is increasing access to affordable childcare. We know that in order for people to work, they obviously need care for their children, and we know that women are more often the ones to have to take time off when they do not have adequate childcare. So that is another trend that we are seeing to address these structural contributors to the wage gap. And then finally, we've seen some other legislative advocacy, and I will quickly touch on it, and you will be excited to hear that our California state law has already done a number of these things, but we're seeing states address the equal pay issue and ensure better protections for equal pay by saying that workers have to be protected in discussing their pay, that they can't be retaliated against for doing so, that employers can't ask about or rely upon prior salary, that they have to use objective non-sex or non-race-based factors to make a salary offer so that the wage gap is not perpetuated. We've seen a trend of requiring employers to provide a salary range for a given position to a candidate so that a worker knows, or a potential worker knows, what the possible pay is that they could negotiate. We know that women often do not negotiate as high as they could, so knowing that range can help them. Another trend we've seen is states trying to cover other protected classes. So the Federal Equal Pay Act only applies to sex-based pay disparities, and several other state Equal Pay Acts also only apply to sex. But we're seeing this trend of adding race and ethnicity and other protected classes, including in California, which you'll hear more about. And then finally, we're seeing a legislative trend in ensuring that there are more accurate comparisons of jobs, meaning that a law will require that an employer provide equal pay for, let's say, substantially similar work, as opposed to the word equal. And the reason for that is we've seen courts interpret this equal work standard sometimes very strictly and say that just a very minor difference in jobs might justify a very, very high difference in pay. So we want to make sure that people who are doing substantially similar work are being paid equally. Great. So I want to just end by saying that I am so excited to be followed by another speaker, two speakers who are going to touch on our state law, because a lot of these trends that we've seen as effective to closing the gender and racial wage gap have been implemented here in California. So I'll turn it back to you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a lot of information, very informative. I'd now like to turn this over to Ms. Dory Chang from the Labor Commissioner's Office.
Hi, everyone. So my co-presenter Sherri Bell and I are going to be covering the California Equal Pay Act. I'm an attorney with the Labor Commissioner's Office. And Sherri, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Sure. My name is Sherri Bell, and I'm a Deputy Labor Commissioner in the Retaliation Unit out of Los Angeles.
Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm California First.
So in case you weren't all familiar with the Labor Commissioner's Office, we want to briefly touch on what it is that we do so you have some context for the rest of this presentation. And so the mission of the California Labor Commissioner's Office is to ensure a just day's pay in every workplace in the state and to promote economic justice through robust enforcement of labor laws. So basically that just means we want to make sure that you're getting paid what you should be getting paid. And so that means that we enforce laws like the Equal Pay Act and other basic workplace rights. So if you have questions related to whether you're supposed to be getting paid more for your overtime, or whether maybe your meal and rest breaks are being cut short, or you even have questions about the minimum wage, those are all questions that our office can answer. And if you feel like you need to file a claim, you can also do that through our office. And the great thing about our process is that our process is really designed for workers to be able to navigate it on their own. And you don't need a lawyer to file a claim. So, if you feel like you have a question and you feel like, okay, I think I need to file a claim, you should feel empowered to come to our office and do just that, and not feel like, oh, because, I don't know the law, or I don't have a lawyer, that you can't do that. You absolutely can. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to jump into the substance of the Equal Pay Act. And what we're hoping to do today is, we're going to cover the Equal Pay Act and talk more about the protections that it provides. But we're also going to learn a little bit about what evidence you're going to need to file a successful claim with the Labor Commissioner's Office. And then we'll provide you with some tips on how to gather that evidence. Next slide, please. And before we jump into the actual substance of the Equal Pay Act, Sherri and I wanted to share a little bit with you about the pay inequity that Black women face and the impact of that, to really ground our presentation in what this actually means for women on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Dory. So we went over some statistics earlier, but I'll just highlight that some again. And, this pandemic has highlighted structural inequities as it relates to race-based discrimination. It showed up in employment, and it shows up sometimes in our healthcare outcomes as well. For instance, during the pandemic, Black women performing essential work such as cleaning and janitorial just aren't being paid equally. Black women are being paid about 66% less than their white male counterparts are being paid for the same work. Also, more than 80% of Black mothers, such as myself, are the sole breadwinners for their household. Yet Black families with kids have a single penny in wealth for every dollar that white families with kids have. So these types of conditions kind of perpetuate, Black women-led families being able to meet their needs amidst this crisis that we're currently in. Next slide. I think it's on you, Dory. Next slide, please.
Okay, I think you can go to the next one as well. So thank you, Sherri, for sharing those statistics with us. And we can really see how devastating the impacts of unequal pay really are. And it, as Sherri said, it's beyond just, the women. It's also the families and other people that rely on these women that are affected. And so laws like the Equal Pay Act are really important in being able to address those sorts of disparities in outcomes. And so what we have in California is the Equal Pay Act, which we find in Labor Code section 1197.5. And Jessica mentioned that there is a federal counterpart, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to just focus in on the state law. And so the state law does a couple of things. So most importantly, it prohibits an employer from paying its employees less than employees of the opposite sex, another race, or another ethnicity for substantially similar work. So our Equal Pay Act is broader than just sex. It also covers race and ethnicity. And you're going to want to remember this term, substantially similar work, because this is actually going to be a key factor that we're going to think about when we talk about equal pay claims. Other things that the Equal Pay Act prohibits is employers cannot use prior salary to justify differences in wages. And so remember, Jessica said that this is actually one of the drivers of unequal pay. And so in California, you can't use prior salary information. It also provides retaliation protection so that your employer can't punish you or go after you for speaking up about unequal pay. And then lastly, it provides a right to talk about your wages with your colleagues. So again, remember Jessica mentioned that pay secrecy is a driver of unequal pay. And here in California, it's illegal to prevent your workers from talking about pay with their colleagues. So this is, a huge way that we can help each individually really advance unequal pay is by being transparent about our pay with our other colleagues. So basically, all this is going to boil down to is two claims. And so you're going to want to remember that one, you can have a claim for unequal pay, which is basically just saying, someone else is getting paid more than me based on sex, race, or ethnicity. Or you can have a second type of claim, which is a retaliation claim. And that's basically saying, I asserted my rights at the workplace related to equal pay. And as a result, my employer is punishing me for that, right? And so you've been terminated or demoted or faced some other adverse action. We're going to first talk about this unequal pay claim. And the unequal pay claim is broken down into two steps. So first, we're going to want to talk about, think about substantially similar work. So whether you and that other colleague are doing substantially similar work, and Sherri is going to talk a little bit more about what that means. And then the second step is you're going to want to figure out, well, even if we are doing substantially similar work, is there some other justification for why maybe that pay difference is still okay? And so those are the two steps to kind of figuring out whether you have an unequal pay claim or not. And Sherri is going to now talk about what substantially similar work means.
Thank you, Dory. So what is substantially similar work, right? Well, we define it as work.
Sorry, Sherri. Sorry, next slide, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
I'm a little ahead of myself. So the question is, what is substantially similar work, right? Well, we look at it in four areas. Work that is similar in skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions, right? So for example, if you have two nurses who work in the same unit with the same patients, administering the same drugs with the same level of responsibility. So across the board there. Next slide. So now we're going to get into a little scenario regarding substantially similar work. So the first one is that Frank and Betty are both employees at Big Box Corp in the HR department at Big Box Corp. They are responsible for investigating internal employee complaints. They also both work in the same office and are both required to travel off-site for investigations as needed. However, Frank is typically assigned cases for investigation that are more complex and or sensitive than Betty's. His cases usually require longer travel time and take longer to investigate. So the question for you guys to drop your responses in the chat is, are Frank and Betty engaged in substantially similar work in terms of working conditions, effort, skill, and responsibility? You could just drop your responses in the chat. Yes, I have a yes, I have a yes. Okay, couple of yeses there, no, no. Wow, like 50-50, right? Okay, well, in terms of how we would look at this during an investigation, we'll look at in terms of this prompt, we'll look at the things like the longer travel time, or the cases being longer, taking longer to investigate, or the cases being more complex and or sensitive, and the duration of the investigation being longer as well. From this prompt, Frank and Betty are actually not engaged in substantially similar work. However, we encourage you to file your complaint if you have a suspicion or belief that you are being paid less than a colleague based on your race or gender. We'll take a closer look into that, This is just some of the ways to get your mind jogging about how we would look at the concept of substantially similar work. Next, Dory, next slide. Dory.
So once we've thought about, are we engaged in substantially similar work, then we're going to move on to the second step. If, the answer is yes, that you've been engaged in substantially similar work. And so then we're going to then think about, is there some other justification for this difference in pay that might make it okay? And so the EPA recognizes that, not all differences in wage rates are going to be based on sex, race, or ethnicity, right? Like there are legitimate reasons why we might want to pay someone more. And so the reasons that are acceptable are seniority, merit, quantity, quality of production, or some other factor than sex, race, or ethnicity, such as education, training, or experience. So again, if someone's been working there longer, than someone who's maybe just started like 2 months ago, we would want to acknowledge that and pay them more, right? And so the Equal Pay Act does capture that some differences in pay are going to be okay. That said, if you think about, if you're thinking through these two steps of an unequal pay claim and you're not sure, or you start to think like, I don't know, that justification, it just doesn't sit right with me, then, you might want to start thinking about whether you have an unequal pay claim under the Equal Pay Act. And, start thinking about what do you want your next steps to be? Do you want to try to file a claim? Do you want to try to gather some evidence? Do you maybe want to approach your employer? These are all things you can start to think about because, there might be something there. Next slide, please. If you do decide to assert your rights under the Equal Pay Act and confront your employer about the unequal pay, then you're going to be protected under the law. So the EPA contains protections that prohibit retaliation. And I think like a layperson who isn't so familiar with the law is just going to understand that basically as like, you spoke up, right? You were like the squeaky wheel, and the employer's upset at you for being the squeaky wheel. And so like they've done something to kind of take it out on you. Like they've maybe cut your hours or cut your pay, or maybe even moved you to like a different unit or office location that's like less desirable, or terminated you. So, I think like we all kind of have like a gut instinct about when something has happened to us, right? That's not right. And I think, you should use that as kind of as guidance. And, legally under the law, the way that the agency would look at this and also the courts would look at this is that we're going to break down retaliation into 4 different elements. And so, if you think you have a potential retaliation claim, it might not hurt to also just sit down and kind of think about it in this way, because it's going to be the way that our agency approaches an investigation. So the first thing you're going to want to figure out is, did you assert a right? And we call that a protected activity. And so under the Equal Pay Act, it's going to be something like, you talk to your employer about unequal pay, or filed a claim for unequal pay, or, maybe talk to your colleagues about your pay. So something that, is a protected right under the Equal Pay Act that you asserted. Then you're going to want to have employer knowledge, which just requires that the employer know that you asserted your rights. And that's so that, if your employer does take some sort of action against you, we know that it's because they knew about your protected activity. Otherwise, they don't really have any motivation to sort of target you and go after you, right? And then the next thing that we're going to want is what we call an adverse action, which is just whatever, bad thing that the employer did to you. And then lastly, we're going to want causation, which is just making sure that, that adverse action was caused by your assertion of the protected activity. So if, your employer has some other explanation, legitimate explanation for why they decided to terminate you or whatever, like, maybe they were just layoffs, right? Because of recession or something like that, then, that wouldn't necessarily be retaliation. If you do file a claim with us, then you would be able to potentially recover your lost wages, be reinstated to that position. Regain your lost hours, or, we could also explore whatever else you feel like would make you whole under that circumstance. So I think we're now going to stop very quickly and see if there are any questions, since we've kind of covered like the two main claims that you have under the Equal Pay Act. I don't know if there were any in the chat or if there are any that people want to share now. Julie asked, what is the statute of limitation for filing a claim under the EPA? We're going to cover that in a second, so let's just put a pin on that. If you have more questions about that, we can cover that later.
And Dory, I think Allison had a question regarding California state laws, and I can go back. I want to make sure her question got answered as well.
Oh, I see. For employers with employees in different states, would the California Equal Pay Act apply to only California employees or California-based employers? So I think generally the way that it works is that the wherever the employee is located, I think those state laws govern. And so, you know, even if you are you're an employee working for a California-based employer, if you are working at an office in, like let's say Tennessee, then California law isn't necessarily going to cover you. Were there any other questions? Okay, so I don't see anything else. So I think maybe we can move on. And I think Sherri is next going to share an example of, what the Labor Commissioner's Office can do for workers with an EPA claim.
Thanks, Dory. So yeah, now we're just going to hear a success story of a worker who chose to exercise their rights with the Labor Commissioner's Office. So in this story, Ms. O filed a claim with the Labor Commissioner's Office, alleging her employer was in violation of the Equal Pay Act, as she was paid a lower rate of pay than her white male coworkers. She was earning $12,000 less a year for doing the same work. Her employer's defense was that the difference in pay was justified and that they were not in violation of the Equal Pay Act. However, after multiple discussions, Ms. O and the employer, along with the Deputy Labor Commissioner, were able to negotiate a settlement for Ms. O in the amount of $15,000 and also a raise in salary from the $80,000 to the $92,000, so closing that $12,000 pay gap. What this settlement was able to do for Ms. O was give her a raise in salary and allow her to continue to work with dignity and better provide for her family. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about what you can do to, so filing a claim. Let's talk about filing a claim. Let's talk deadlines and statutes of limitation here. So for claims of unequal pay, the worker has 2 years to file a claim with the Labor Commissioner's Office or an individual lawsuit. In certain circumstances, a worker may get extra time, an extra year, but that is dependent on the instance. So we might want to have that worker consult with an attorney or call us up at the Labor Commissioner's Office to hear a little bit more about what's going on there. And also for retaliation claims under the Equal Pay Act and general retaliation claims, the worker has 1 year to file with the Labor Commissioner's Office or an individual lawsuit. That can be like civil. Thank you. Next slide. I'll hand it over to Dory.
Yeah, so, we're thinking about, okay, deadlines and, what do you need to do to file a claim? So the next thing that you might want to think about is, what kind of evidence do I want to gather? And, this is a long list, and I want to say, don't worry about it. We don't expect you to come to us with all of this evidence already collected. We're just putting it up here because if you do have easy access to it, it can be helpful to gather and to just give the investigator a head start on your investigation. Like something like your job duties and background, right? Like you might already have a resume ready to go that you can share with us, right? So, if any of this information is easy for you to come by, like great, get it and share it with us. The two things that I did want to highlight on this list that might, just catch people a little bit off guard are performance reviews and disciplinary records. And I know that, we're not all perfect, right? We're human. And so sometimes we don't always have like perfect or stellar performance reviews. And certainly, sometimes we have disciplinary records, like maybe we just showed up to work late a couple of times or, whatever it is, right? And I don't want you all to kind of hold on to that anxiety and kind of let it fester or like try to dodge those questions with an investigator. If you do have those sorts of things on in your employment file, just let us know. It really isn't a big deal. It's something that's good for us to know because we can investigate it and answer questions about it. We might discover like, hey, other folks at your workplace in similar job positions also have other disciplinary records, right? Or like, everybody's kind of got similar performance reviews. So you don't really have anything to worry about. It maybe actually doesn't impact your claim at all. But, we can't know that until we investigate it. And so just let us know. The more information that you can give to the deputy and the more honest you are with them, it really just strengthens the investigation and strengthens your claim. So I don't want it to be something that you all worry about. Next slide, please.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I had a little trouble with the mute. So now let's talk about filing the complaint and how to perfect this complaint to make it clear to the person reading it. So claims related to retaliation and unequal pay can be filed online on our website, dir.ca.gov. We'll give it out again at the end. But you just want to remember to try to be as detailed as possible in on your complaint form, right? And telling us what you're alleging, right? Vagueness is not your friend. Remember back in the day, the 5 W's and the 1 H, you want to think about the who, what, where, when, why, how in a clear and concise manner. You want to tell us what happened to you and recount your events as if you were talking to a friend or family member, right? So for example, you might not want to say, I think I'm filing this complaint because I think I'm getting paid less than a coworker, right? That's kind of vague, right? It might be a little more clear and concise to the person reading it is, I think I'm getting paid less than John Doe, who has the same job title as me. He mentioned it in conversation that he was making $5,000 a year more, right? So that's something that can help us out a little bit more on the front end. However, if you don't have all the details or are just not familiar with articulating those things on paper, an investigator will contact you for your statement and try to get you to submit evidence to support your allegations and witnesses as well. So the investigation will consist of the investigator speaking with you and your employer and also available witnesses. And we will review your employer's defense of the allegations as well with you. So we have a summary procedures on our website. You can kind of look at our general investigation process. So when it comes to the Equal Pay Act, the Equal Pay Act requires the labor commissioner to keep the worker's name confidential at the time of filing. However, the worker does have, well, I'll just say this. It is confidential upon filing. We may at some point have to approach the worker about the need to disclose their name if it's necessary in completing the investigation. So that's a cool aspect of this process, is that you do have the benefit of anonymity in the beginning, right? However, if it calls for it, we may need to release the name, but that's a case-by-case basis. So yeah, that is it when it comes to filing a complaint. And I'll hand it over to Dory to get into one of our next scenarios.
Sure. And just to clarify, if we did need to disclose your name, that would be something that we would let you know about, and we would leave that completely up to you to make that decision. So if you decided at that point, I don't feel comfortable with that and I want to withdraw my claim, you would be totally you would be completely able to do that. You're in the driver's seat with that. So we want to just go over a quick scenario because, we're talking about gathering evidence. And so we wanted you to maybe just start thinking about, what is it that you might want to target and get if you have a potential equal pay claim. So this scenario Katie works as a manager in an office with two other managers, Bill and Joe. And while in the lunchroom, she overhears two staff members chatting about their salaries. And one of them mentions that Bill told me he's making $85,000 a year. Katie's upset because she realizes that Bill is making $10,000 more than she is. And after lunch, she decides to ask her supervisor about the difference in pay. So what should Katie do next if she wants to sort of start gathering evidence or documenting, what's going on with her potential Equal Pay Act claim? Should she A, document any conversations with her supervisor, B, gather relevant information about Bill, like his education, rate of pay, and responsibilities, C, gather relevant information about Joe, like his education, rate of pay, and responsibilities, D, only A and B, or E, all of the above? So if you can just maybe take a couple seconds and put your answer in the chat box, and then we'll circle back and discuss. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think everybody's gotten it. It is E, all of the above. I think, I think what can sometimes trip people up is Joe. And so, we don't have any information about Joe. We don't know how he fits into this Equal Pay Act claim, right? But we would still want to gather information about him because we would want to see, what's going on to kind of get a bigger picture about, what this workplace is, how this workplace is paying people, and how they're kind of figuring out what to pay people. And so gathering information about Joe is just as important as gathering information about Bill. Okay, so next slide, please.
So now let's talk about what you can do to gather evidence in filing your complaint. So you want to make sure that you document everything you can, meaning that if you're going to have a discussion with your employer, you might want to send a respectful email or follow up with a text message. Or if you do have a verbal conversation, maybe send a respectful email summarizing that conversation, because all of that could be looked at evidence down the line. So if you're making a request, it might be best to put that request in writing. And again, try to communicate via email or text to have some kind of written record. You also may want to help identifying witnesses that can help support your allegations, whether that is their name, if they have an email address that you can grasp, or a phone number, that would be helpful for the investigator. Also, if you want to start compiling information regarding your job and the comparator's job, you might want to ask HR for a description of the job duties, right, that you have versus the person that you're alleging is, earning more than you. You also have the right to speak with your colleagues about pay. There is a labor code that protects that. You have a right to discuss your wages. If an employer tries to tell you that you are, that to get you to sign something to say that, that's not in compliance with state law. Additionally, when gathering evidence, whether it's job descriptions or going to LinkedIn and looking at the experience and that nature of the person that you are comparing yourself to. I know we're probably tempted sometimes to record things. We all have cell phones, that have recording features. However, California is a two-party consent state, meaning that both parties have to agree to being recorded. So you just want to be mindful of that as you are advocating for yourself in this process. Dory, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that covers it. So I think we can stop now again briefly for some questions if there are any, or we can move on. Okay, well then, turning it back over to Tiffany.
Thank you, Dory and Sherri. This was a lot of information. And again, everyone, please note that we will have this information available to you, and we'll send this out to you, so don't feel like you have to gather all this information right now. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to present to you Ms. Nichelle Henderson. She's a trustee with the Los Angeles Community College District.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nichelle Henderson. I'm a wife, mother, grandmother, teacher, union activist, and an unapologetically Black woman. I'd like to thank the Equal Rights Advocates, the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, and the First Partner for their work on gender pay parity, and to all in attendance for joining in this discussion. If we are to engage in a productive dialogue around the factors contributing to pay equity for women, we must first center conversations around the factors that contribute to pay inequity and their impacts on Black women, Asian women, Pacific Islander women, and Indigenous women. Inequity in pay and in education are issues that I champion because inequity impacts not only my life, but the lives of countless millions of Black women around the world, thus shaping our collective story. I am an elected official, but I caution you in presuming that I imagine my life today, 30, 20, or even 10 years ago. There was a time that I was a divorced single mother trying desperately to keep my head above water while following my academic dreams. I relied on public assistance for a time. As a Black woman, the perception of the stereotypical Black welfare queen weighed heavily upon me and continues to. I came into this world in the late 1960s to parents born in the early 1940s, both painfully tragic times in this nation's history. From the moment of my birth, my parents prepared me for a world that would not value me, not value my intellect, my ability, or my life. My passion for addressing systemic racism in education was fueled by my personal experience. I applied for college prepared for the academic rigor and for the whiteness of my college, but I was ill prepared for the bias and microaggressions that changed the trajectory of my life. On one particular day, I was excited about officially starting college now that the summer bridge program was ending and setting my fall schedule. The receptionist impatiently waves me in and directs me to the counselor, who impatiently motions for me to sit down. No welcome, not even a pretentious smile. She glances at my class schedule and sets it aside. She dares to question the validity of my transcripts. And she recommends classes that are not required for my major. My frustration reaches the tipping point. She loudly admonishes me to settle down and threatens to call campus security. I instantly visualize the outcome. Missing Black student found dead after running with campus police, news at 11. I'm frustrated. I wipe the tear from my cheek as I leave the office. If you can relate, I apologize if this story is a trigger for you. The emotion of that day is indelibly etched in my memory. Not being supported by the people tasked with ensuring my academic success was disheartening. I am still angry and triggered by reliving the trauma. Experiences such as these shape who we are, how we view ourselves, and how we view ourselves in the world. My intent today is to encourage and empower you to stand tall, to push your shoulders back and hold your head up high, to persist through the worst of times, and to highlight the fact that the deep impact of systemic racism on Black women and our families lasts for generations, not mere moments in time. So in my time with you, I will discuss a few of the systemic isms that impact pay equity for Black women, give you insight as to why Black women are so effing angry, and share a few suggestions as to what you can do to affect change. In this moment, years from now, 50 years from now or next year, women that we stand with today will stand in judgment of us and how we respond to this movement. So I ask you, Why is this? Why should the conversation being centered around Black women's pay equity impact you? Why should you have a sense of urgency in response to yet another situation of Black womanhood? In response to that question, I say to you, pay equity for Black women should be important to you because pay equity for Black women is pay equity for all of us. It will take all of us standing together to bring about meaningful change and in this fight for pay equity for all women. Like Angela Davis, I am no longer accepting the things that I cannot change. I am changing the things that I cannot accept. Overcoming gender pay inequity and addressing systemic racism are important to me, deeply important to me. Perhaps you believe that the system mistreats all women equally, or that this is not your fight. You may have forgotten or are unaware of the manner in which the fight for women's suffrage ended. When women of all ethnicities worked together, marched, discussed, planned to get the right to vote, and only one group of women was given the right. The others of us were left to wait half a century. Today, Black women are wondering if we should again risk vulnerability to fight for an equitable solution for all women, knowing that history could very well repeat itself. This is a saddening thought to me, and I hope that it is to you. Systemic isms impact pay equity for women, but to add insult to injury, racism is a systemic ism that perpetuates disparities in opportunity and access in education and the workforce, and subsequently pay for women and girls of color because isms are rooted in ideology. Did you know that Black girls in middle and high school are more likely to be suspended and more severely punished for the same exhibited behavior as their white or Latina peers? And subsequently are less likely to graduate high school because they are as likely to become just as involved due to school discipline policies as Black boys are. Black childhood is too often criminalized. To attest to this, the common applications for colleges and universities have discontinued the practice of having college applicants report K-12 disciplinary actions due to the disproportionate discipline rates of Black girls. In completing college applications, I responded to the question, have you ever been suspended from school? With yes. The reason is irrelevant because the outcome has irreparably altered my academic record. Social emotional learning, policy implementation, and the promotion of self-efficacy and anti-racist and social justice frameworks will not be effective until we address explicit biases towards Black women and girls. Malcolm X once said that the most neglected person in America is the Black woman. Black women's energy and work ethic are welcome, but our voices and physical presence in the decision-making spaces are not. In the context of opportunity and access for Black women and girls in California, racism informs the policy and practice that has created the academic and economic achievement gaps that have prevented generations of us from realizing our dreams and building wealth. Women comprise 50% of the world population and 70% of the world's poor. Now imagine, if you will, a system that places you at a disadvantage before you ever enter it, being relegated to a low-wage position due to isms in hiring practices. Imagine being employed, yet living in poverty. Poverty being the condition created and exacerbated by insufficient income. When there is no room in your budget for emergency contingencies or savings, every day is a rainy day. and you are existing in a mode of survival. I don't have to imagine it because I have lived it. The academic and economic outcomes of Black women and girls are determined by the preconceptions that non-BIPOC folks have regarding our intellectual abilities and competencies. For centuries, we have been characterized as uneducated and apathetic. Black girls have not been allowed to experience childhood in the same manner that white girls and Latinas do, due to their physical development. According to Rebecca Epstein, this lends itself to adultification, which is the racist belief that Black girls' comprehension and decision-making skills are comparable to those of an adult, and the resulting consequence of their actions should also be comparable to that of an adult. This stereotypical notion is an unthinkable throwback from this country's historic treatment of Black women and children, and a source of our generational trauma. Adultification informs how Black women and girls are treated in academic and social settings. When we are perceived to be aggressive, defiant, and violent versus inquisitive, eager, and capable, Black girls need to see themselves reflected in Black women that are living in our purpose. Black women existing in our society is a conundrum. How do you live your best life in a society that does not value your existence in that society? When Black girls are suspended from school, they are absent from the instructional space, which equates to missing learning opportunities, which decrease the potential for positive academic outcomes, such as graduation, college admission, and employability. Black girls are also less likely to be provided academic support needed to set and achieve academic goals. When Black girls do demonstrate a desire to succeed academically, they are discouraged from pursuing higher education and STEAM-related programs of study. Given this seemingly insurmountable circumstance, it is of no surprise that increasing numbers of Black women are employed in low-wage jobs. In the wake of the COVID pandemic, the economic distress experienced by women in low-wage jobs has been intensified, as Black women tend to be essential workers, work multiple jobs to make ends meet, have minimal health care, live in unsafe environments, and have unmet childcare needs. Low-wage employment is a deterrent to upward mobility. So I'll share with you a few reasons why Black women are just so effing angry. We live in a society where racism and bias are triggers that piss women off, piss Black women off. They frustrate us and cause us to act out in ways that may frighten you. But we ask that you put your fragility aside and demonstrate compassion. You may be tired of hearing about racism, but not nearly as tired as we are of dealing with it. So I will take you out of your comfort zone for a few minutes, because I would be remiss if I did not offer suggestions as to how you can take intentional action to address pay equity for Black women. First, understand that trauma, like poverty, is generational, and racism impacts our daily lives. When Fannie Lou Hamer said that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired, she spoke for all Black women, voicing our frustrations about a system designed to silence and marginalize us, a system that continues to victimize us and trigger our traumas, a system that can and should be dismantled. On a social level, when you encounter a Black woman, instead of preparing yourself for an adversarial encounter, remind yourself of today's discussion and show her grace. I'm a member of the Los Angeles Community College District Board of Trustees. It is a 7-member board. I am one of 2 women. Earlier this year, Trustee Andrea Hoffman, the other woman on the board, and I co-sponsored a resolution on gender pay equity. And it was passed by the entire board. I must share that Trustee Hoffman was the only woman on the board for 3 years prior to my arrival. The next thing that I would ask you to do is acknowledge that patriarchal leadership steeped in white supremacy has created economic achievement gaps through discriminatory hiring practices. So I ask you to commit to focusing on diversity and access in employment interviews and promotional evaluations. Reevaluate job classifications and hiring policies to ensure that they are free of bias. Commit to join and/or support a labor union. We tirelessly work to overcome oppressive practices against women, BIPOC, and LGBTQIA employees. Women that are members of labor unions often earn more than ununionized women workers. I asked you to commit to financially supporting and electing women that represent our collective ideals to city councils, school and college boards, state assembly, Senate, and Congress. Women leaders bring compassion, collaboration, and a coalition building to decision-making spaces and push needed policy change. Senator Elizabeth Warren told us during her presidential campaign that if you aren't at the table, you're on the menu. So are you feasting or being feasted upon? Quite honestly, I am tired of talking about this. So will you make the commitment to take an intentional stand in the movement for women's equity, women's pay equity, and pay equity for all women? If we all commit to carrying the load, 2022 could be the year that we all celebrate a win. Thank you again to the equal rights advocates and to the California Commission on Women and Girls for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nichelle. And I want to let everyone know when I said empowering, I hope tonight you felt very much so empowered by Ms. Nichelle Henderson. Thank you very, very much for being here tonight. Next slide, please. Last but not least, we have our chair, Lauren Babb, who will be doing the last bit of our programming tonight.
Thank you, Tiffany. Wow, way to center ourselves after Ms. Nichelle's presentation. I definitely resonate with a lot of those themes and tones, and it's just good to ground us in where we're at and where we come from and where we have to go. So thanks to everyone that has contributed to this webinar. It has been so helpful for me, and I hope that it's helpful for others. We're recording, so if you want to share it with someone, please do. I'm not going to take a lot of your time because I know we're at dinner time and folks are probably thinking about food like I am, but just a quick plug for the commission, a couple things we're working on. Your voice, your vote. Basically to what Ms. Nichelle was saying, like, we have the power to vote. It is critical. We have a recall going on. Some of y'all should have, all of you should have your ballots. And so if you have questions around that, there's a ton of resources on our website, but also with the Secretary of State website. So I saw someone in the chat ask what we could do for pay equity. We need to be voting. And so I think now more than ever, it is critical that we take a stand, we participate in our process. I'm new to California, so this is my first recall, but it was very simple. So if you have any questions around that, we have resources on the website. But also will direct you to the Secretary of State's website to make sure that you all vote. The registration deadline is August 30th, and you can register online at the Secretary of State office. Another program that the Commission is continuing to work on, you heard the first partner talk about it a bit, is Equal Pay California. We're continuing to challenge businesses to take the Equal Pay Pledge and champion equal pay. We are conducting annual gender analysis of pay gap. We're reviewing hiring and promotion practices, and we're really evaluating what pay equity means. And a part of that work is definitely through corporations, nonprofits, small businesses, giving us their best practices on pay equity, because there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this work. And so we are really advocating. So if you have a company or you're where you work, you want to challenge them to take on our pledge, you can sign up on the website. And we will be conducting business roundtables this fall to get best practices, to hopefully be able to, hold folks accountable on pay equity. It is so important that we continue to move the needle as a commission, but also to give others the opportunity to share what works and doesn't work. So I'm really thrilled about where this campaign is heading. As the commission itself, we are making this our top priority, and we're holding our feet to the fire to make sure that we are promoting equity in pay at the state level, at the corporate level, at the nonprofit level, and that starts with conversations. So we invite all of you to join us as we continue to roll this out and roll up our sleeves and do the hard work to figure out where we can move the needle on equity of pay. So I will take the next slide because I have a little bit of homework that I'm going to ask for folks. We need your help, honestly. We are rolling out a recovery plan for women and girls on COVID relief. And so I'm not sure a lot of folks are aware, but our commission has been granted a pot of funds to do direct relief work for women and girls in the state. Myself and my 16 colleagues don't pretend to know what the issues are today. And so we're asking folks to participate in a survey to tell us about your experience, through COVID, so that we have an understanding of where the need is. Some people will say childcare. Some people will say access to healthcare. Some people will say career development. And so we are really asking folks to share that public survey with any and all people of California. Yes, our team can definitely put the links in the chat for you all. The public survey is for anyone, any person in California, not even just women and girls, anyone. We want to get that direct feedback from you all so that when we have decisions, we are coming from a place that's informed by the community we serve. So really excited about that tool. It'll really kickstart our recovery planning and all of the things to come that we hope to fix. We know that this pandemic has been hard for women and girls. It's been hard for everybody. We don't know when it's going to end. But we're doing our part to get that feedback so that we can share that with our legislative members, share that with the governor's office, and just continue to uplift women and girls at the state level. And if you know folks on the local commissions, we have about 28, and someone yell at me or put it in the chat if I'm wrong. I'm always not the best with numbers. Commissions throughout the state. And so we are going to be funding local work. So I know we've got some folks, and Ms. Nichelle's also from LA County. So the LA County Commission, we've got San Francisco commissions. So we also are asking anyone that has participated in the local commission to give their feedback so that we can understand how they work, what they need. I come from a local commission in Contra Costa. It was not funded. We didn't have staff. It was all volunteer, grassroots. And so we're really looking to change that so that it's feasible for it to be representative of the communities they serve. So please, please, please share those surveys out. We are going to continue to have some hearings in the fall around pay equity, and y'all are on our list now, hopefully, so you'll be able to help us out. But we really are in a space of we want to hear from you and not pretend to know that we know what the issues are. So, that is just my call, my plug, my call to action, that you help us figure this out. And lastly, I said I was going to keep it short and sweet. Just thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you to our presenters, our panelists, everyone that really cares about this issue, because without all of you, how are we going to do this work? So I invite you all to continue to be informed with us. And I see some issues with the links. We'll get that fixed. But I'm going to turn it back to Tiffany, and I think we're going to take some questions. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lauren. I really appreciate that. Next slide, please. Okay, so now is the time for questions and answers. I think we have went through quite a few of the questions that people may have asked during presentation. I think I want to shout out for Nicole and Catherine, and I'll make sure that I get back to you, send me a direct message. And they had some questions on the lens of what the commission is working on. So make sure that I will get back to you guys on that. anyone have any questions that you guys would like to throw out to the Labor Commissioner's Office? I know there was a lot of information there. There was a lot of information that the Equal Rights Advocates put out. And if you guys have any questions for Ms. Nichelle Henderson or our chair, that would be great. Also on this page that you guys are looking at right now is our resources. So I think at the beginning of this, I did mention that if you have any specific legal questions, here's the Equal Rights Advocates Advice Counseling line that you may send your questions to. On the very next slide, I'm sorry, can you go next slide? On this side, we have the Labor Commissioner's Office for filing a claim. Here's a retaliation complaint, and there's several resources here for facts if you need to get some facts on equal pay. And also, please reach out to the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. So we are here for you. We'd like to hear from you, any issues that you guys are experiencing. Please reach out to us. We have our email address here, and I want to echo what Lauren said to make sure that you reach out to the Secretary of State's office for the upcoming election. Make sure that's available to you as well. I doesn't look like I see any additional questions. I'll wait just a moment to see if I have more questions that pop in the chat. I do want to make a reminder to you guys that all of the information that you heard today, we will be sending it out to everybody who registered. You will make sure you get those links. If you guys do not, please do not hesitate to send the commission a note. We'll make sure that you get that information. We will continue to have these conversations on Black women. It will not just be Black Women's Equal Pay Day. This will be our focus. We will continue to work hard at this. I want to let you guys know that any issues or concerns that you have as a woman will ultimately affect all of us as women. So I really appreciate you being here tonight. Have a wonderful evening and take care, everybody.